you search for the top films of Yorkshire, you generally get a lot of list articles. Now, I don't know about you, but I get the feeling that the person writing them hasn't actually sat down and watched all of them. Rather, they were told to write an article and so Googled the top Yorkshire films and just regurgitated it there for some lazy, low-effort content. Well, I wanted to actually sit down and watch as many films as possible. I sat through a whopping 16 of them to give you a definitive list. Now, as you can tell by the title, I won't be including any of the 5 adaptations of Wuthering Heights or any other works by or about the Brontes. This is simply because the Brontes are all you ever hear about in Yorkshire, as though it's not produced any other good books or films of note. They're like York Minster, everyone knows who they are, they don't exactly need any more exposure. So I'm batting for the underdogs here and giving a bit of exposure to other works which might be a bit overshadowed by them. Now, inevitably people will comment as to why this or that wasn't included, so the criteria for inclusion were that the film had to have a significant part of the plot set in Yorkshire. It's not good enough just being there for 15 minutes. It also had to actually be the best, the cream of the crop, a work which was culturally significant and had stood the test of time. So, with that in mind, let's start. Number 10, Chicken Run. Chicken Run is honestly in my top 5 favourite films of all time. It's brilliantly clever, funny, simultaneously parodying and paying tribute to classic war films like The Great Escape and Colditz. Though it doesn't explicitly say that it's set in Yorkshire, canonically the farm is in Yorkshire, and many of the characters speak with a broad Yorkshire accent. In addition, you won't find any Yorkshire villain more iconic than Mrs. Tweedy. However, Yorkshire feels rather incidental to the plot, so it's not really a Yorkshire film, hence why I've put it at number 10. Number 9, The Railway Children. The Railway Children is probably one of the most famous and iconic Yorkshire films, filmed in and around West Yorkshire, including the now famous Oakworth Station in Keighley. It's a very heartwarming story in the same vein of Edwardian children's stories like A Little Princess and The Secret Garden. If you're an adult, you might find the story a little bit twee and childish, but it is an adaptation of a children's book, so, you know. The whole film has a really warm atmosphere to it. It's very light-hearted, though it does erase about 30 years worth of public safety campaigns about railway tracks, with a typical Edwardian moral message. Station porter Albert Perks is Yorkshire personified, probably the most iconic and memorable character of the film. The film really captures the local landscape well. It's a wonderful glimpse of this part of Yorkshire, from rolling hills to industrial towns. It's not just filmed and set in Yorkshire, it's immersed in it. However, like many films of the period, the slow pace does make it difficult to watch at times. Number 8, The Secret Garden. This is a film I watched a lot as a kid, and so it means a lot to me. It's a touching little story about an orphaned and initially spoilt child who, through the process of exploring a manor house and its secret garden, develops as a person and learns a lot about life and people. It relishes in that childlike wonder and thrill of innocent exploration which, though perhaps a little simple for adults, is nevertheless thoroughly enjoyable. Set at Misselthwaite Manor, which is, let's be honest, the most Yorkshire-sounding name ever, and filmed at Allerton Castle, it's a classic family story which just has this real warmth and charm to it. Number 7, Calendar Girls. Calendar Girls? Do you have the soul of a middle-aged woman trapped inside your youthful body? Well, kinda, because I also like Bridget Jones and Mamma Mia. Calendar Girls might seem like just your typical women's comedy film, but it's deceptively good. A Yorkshire Women's Institute set in, of course, the rolling hills and moors finds itself in a bit of a bind and resolves to create a, well, calendar to raise much needed funds for the hospital. Based on a true story, these are ordinary women doing something a little bit extraordinary, and the comedy comes from the fact that it's something as mundane as the Women's Institute in Yorkshire doing a nearly naked calendar. It's an all-star British cast and overall a really great, fun little film which shows off a lot of the countryside and makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Number 6, Rita, Sue and Bob 2. Rita, Sue and Bob 2 is essentially a film about 2 schoolgirls from a council estate in Bradford who have an affair with a man named Bob who definitely should not pass go straight to jail, you know what I mean. Not something you'd really want to watch in a film, but an accurate reflection of what life was like in 1980s Bradford. That's why the whole strapline was Thatcher's Britain with her knickers down. It captures working class life perfectly. It's a film which understands what living in a Yorkshire council estate is like. What really makes it amazing is that it was written by Andrea Dunbar. Now, she wasn't someone who'd gone to university and studied drama and was part of the theatre world. This was a working class girl from a Bradford council estate who was a single mother and only became a playwright when her English teacher encouraged her. She was writing about her own experiences and the experiences of ordinary people around her. It's her ability to capture ordinary life so perfectly which makes this film great. Number 5. The Full Monty. The Full Monty is basically Calendar Girls, but set in depressing post-industrial Sheffield, and the men take off the clothes this time. I've ranked it higher than Calendar Girls simply because it's had more of an impact culturally. Some of the scenes are quite memorable and have been parodied and referenced to in popular culture. I also think that whilst Calendar Girls is set in a thoroughly middle-class, respectable Garden of England, picture postcard perfect little village, The Full Monty is more relatable to ordinary city dwellers, an accurate reflection of conditions across many industrial cities in the 90s. It also reflects more serious issues. As much as it's a light-hearted comedy about male strippers, it does cover topics like sexuality, mental health, unemployment, family issues, masculinity, etc. Number 4. This Sporting Life. This Sporting Life is a bit of a cult classic. It's about a coal miner from Wakefield who becomes a professional rugby league player amidst some personal issues. At a fundamental level, the film is about communication. At the start, Frank, the protagonist, has some of his teeth punched out in a rugby match, and scenes of him inside a dentist's occur throughout. From then on, he struggles to communicate with everyone around him and to express his emotions properly. The only avenue for emotional expression he has is on the rugby pitch, and the only way he can express himself is through aggression and violence. Frank is an incredibly violent character, and it's his aggression which brings him success as a player. But this makes him emotionally stunted and unable to process emotions properly, so he becomes abusive. It's a film about a man's struggle to express himself, and perhaps a commentary on masculinity itself. I think in many ways this film is ahead of its time. Rarely does one see such a gritty, honest examination of life at the time, masculinity, and the internal workings of a troubled 1960s Yorkshireman. But, like The Railway Children, the slow pace might put some people off, so I think it's an acquired taste. Number 3. Kes. Kes is probably the most gritty and accurate depiction of 1960s South Yorkshire I have ever seen. We follow Billy, a young boy from a dysfunctional family who is bullied both at home and at school, struggles to read, is dirty and unkempt, has little to no future ahead of him, is even regarded by his own mother as hopeless, as he escapes a constant barrage of abuse around him and his bleak future by forging a friendship with a kestrel he finds, named Kes. We follow as his friendship with Kes enables his own confidence to grow. He gives a magnificent classroom monologue in which he confidently and passionately talks about everything Kes related. We see the harrowing education system of the 1960s, which definitely would not pass an Ofsted or DBS check these days, and how the options available to a young working class boy at the time were basically an apprenticeship or down the mine. What's amazing about this film is that there's times when it feels like you're watching real people. The way it captures family arguments, going out to the pub on a Saturday night, it's also real and authentic. You feel like a fly on the wall. The strong South Yorkshire accent might be a little impenetrable for those not used to this refined way of speaking, but it adds real character and authenticity. What is remarkable is the performance by the 14-year-old actor David Bradley, who plays the role of Billy and who had never acted in a major production before. It's absolutely incredible that he was able to give such a convincing performance. The whole film is just wonderfully atmospheric, gritty and real, and it's so relatable in many ways. Number 2. Brastoff. Set against the backdrop of anger, depression and hopelessness at the closure of a mine in South Yorkshire, the film follows the endeavours of a brass band and a budding romance with a mysterious newcomer. With a soundtrack provided by the Grindthorpe Colliery Band, again the most Yorkshire sounding name ever, it's a quintessential snapshot of Yorkshire brass band culture which still remains active in some places today. Dealing with a lot of difficult themes, unemployment, poverty, severe mental health, illness, domestic strife, you name it, it makes for a difficult yet captivating watch. But aside from the depressing stuff, there's wonderful comedy as well, down-to-earth Yorkshire wit. It includes some of the most powerful and most iconic pieces of brass band music. And if you don't cry a little bit during the Orange Juice Concerto, then they'll assume you've got no taste or soul. The success of the band is juxtaposed against the rapidly deteriorating domestic situation until it reaches a climax which I won't give away. But overall, it's an incredibly powerful, affecting and entertaining film which everyone should watch, and I challenge anyone to get to the end of it without shedding a tear. Coming finally to number 1, we have, drumroll please, Threads. Threads is probably the most influential and impactful film ever made in Yorkshire. I can guarantee if you were alive in Britain during the 1980s, you heard about Threads, and if you watched it, scared utterly shitless. This film traumatised an entire generation, and young people like me enjoy the immense privilege of not having lots of repressed trauma from it. Well, I did until I watched it. The premise is simple. It's about what happens to Sheffield when a nuclear bomb goes off. Released in 1984, when fear about nuclear war was high and anti-nuclear campaigns popular, it has a finger on the pulse of society like no other film. We get this terrifying, unnerving build-up. What makes this all the more worse is that people largely seem to just get on with their lives as normal, momentarily distracted by the news of something happening far away before returning to their lives. This gives it a real air of tragedy. Apart from the initial preparations by the government, nobody sees it coming, and the protests are largely ineffective. Until they get the news that the fighting has started, that is, and the panic sets in. And as the crisis builds up, you get this constant sick feeling in your stomach, and then the warning siren starts. In the process of writing these reviews, I was making notes as I watched the film, and I stopped writing down the timestamps of clips to show you because I simply couldn't process it anymore. I can't really communicate the effect this film has on you. After you've watched it, you go around with a 1,000-yard stare. I couldn't sleep last night when I watched it. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about it. It couldn't leave my head. No other Yorkshire film has affected the consciousness of Britain as much as Threads has. No other film has made such an impact on the way we think and view the world as this one. Heck, even Ronald Reagan watched it, and that's a pretty impressive achievement. No other film affects you so deeply, and that's why it's my number 1 Yorkshire film. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's inspired you to watch some films you haven't watched before. Yorkshire is a wonderful place for media. There are so many great films and TV shows which have been made. Honestly, you're going to love them all. Obviously, I couldn't include all the great ones, but there is a list in the description of all 16 films I watched, so be sure to check them out. See you next time.